This week's case is a tale of two sisters, Niki and Andre, who fought a bitter battle in court over the will of their late mother. Andre accused Niki of using a drip-drip approach to poison their mother's mind over time against her. Niki was involved in the making of their mother's will, which cut Andre out completely and left everything to Niki. The question for the court was whether Niki had so poisoned their mother's mind by the time she made her will for the court to be able to say that the will was procured by fraud, known in law as fraudulent calumny. So what is fraudulent calumny? Well, it's a situation where a person uses false aspersions to poison the mind of a testator against someone that the testator would ordinarily have made provision for in their will. In this case, Niki and Andre's mother was known to have wanted to leave her estate equally to both sisters, but Niki fed her mother stories that Andre had been taking money from her estate. The mother then came to the conclusion that Andre had taken quite enough from her estate and that to equalize things, she would leave the rest of the estate to Niki. What would the judge make of the allegations? And would the will stand? What can we learn from this case of yet another family destroyed by the expectation of an inheritance? This dispute concerns the validity of a will made by Mrs. Annie Yakovu in August 2012, a few days before her death. She had two daughters, Niki and Andre. In her will, Niki was made the executor and the trustee of the will. There was a declaration in the will by Annie that she hadn't made any provision for Andre. Everything was left to Niki. Niki asked the court to approve the will, while Andre claimed that it should not be allowed to stand because it was procured by fraud. The legal phrase for this kind of allegation of fraud is fraudulent calumny. Andre alleged that Niki committed a fraud on their mother, and as a result, their mother made no provision for her in the will. The elements of a claim of fraudulent calumny are that the person alleged to have committed the fraud has poisoned the mind of a testator by casting untruthful aspersions or allegations against other potential beneficiaries. As a result, the discretion and the intentions of the testator are overcome. Such aspersions or allegations must have been made by the person knowing that they were false or not knowing or caring whether they were true or false. Niki and Andre's mother lived between Cyprus and the UK. Their mother's health had been declining, especially after their father died. Niki was the one who took care of their mother's money, which was made up mostly of bank deposits of approximately €1 million in both England and Cyprus. After the death of their father, the accounts were put into the joint names of Annie and Niki for what Niki describes as administrative convenience. Niki freely admits that it was always Annie's intention to leave her estate equally between her two daughters. By early August 2012, Annie's health had deteriorated and it had become clear that she didn't have long to live. Niki hurriedly arranged for her to make a will. She was present when her mother saw Mr. Antonio, who drafted the will. At the meeting, Mr. Antonio asked about the estate, and Niki told him that about €500,000 had already been transferred to Andre. His evidence was that Annie believed that excluding Andre would allow a more even distribution of her assets to her daughters, as Andre had already helped herself to a substantial amount of assets, while Niki had not. Niki was the one who arranged for the will to be made and for its signing. Andre said that Niki even tried to keep her away from hospital when their mother was dying, just to make sure it was signed without Andre knowing about it. There were 4 main incidents the judge had to consider. These are the incidents that Andre claimed had formed the basis of the poisoning of their mother's mind against her. Among the issues were: Andre said she had moved the Cyprus bank account, which was formerly in Annie and Niki's names, into hers and Annie, but always, she said, with the intention that the money was all her mother's. She says she never intended to claim that money for herself, but Niki took this move of the money badly, even accusing the bank of fraud. She told their mother that Andre had helped herself to the money and even suggested to her that they should call the police. Andre later added Niki to the joint account, so it was then in their three names. But that doesn't appear to have pacified Niki. She was still angry. So then Niki told their mother that Andre's husband had stolen £1,000 from her by collecting rent due to their mother and pocketing £1,000 of that money. Naturally, their mother was upset by that, and it affected her feeling towards Andre. As the judge remarked, this might seem trivial, especially for a woman with hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank, but it made sense for her to be angered, as she had come to believe that Andre had indeed run away with her money. There was also the occasion when their mother travelled to the UK in June 2012 as her health got worse. Their mother paid €85 for an oxygen cylinder to use on the journey. Niki convinced her that Andre wouldn't pay and had forced Annie to make the payment herself. This made Annie quite unhappy to think that her daughter would not even pay for the oxygen cylinder, especially as she believed her daughter had already helped herself to a huge chunk of her money. Then there was an email that Andre sent to Niki regarding their mother's health. She said in the email that she was concerned about their mother's eyesight. She said, "I'm also concerned that she sees imaginary dogs and pictures moving. This will be as a result of her eyesight." But when Niki translated this into Greek to their mother, what did she tell her? She said that Andre said their mother was seeing wild dogs and was questioning her sanity, and this greatly upset their mother. The burden was on Andre to establish on a balance of probabilities that the fraud had happened. The judge was very scathing of Niki's evidence. He said, "I find Niki to be a thoroughly dishonest and manipulative individual to whom integrity and truth are less important than achieving what she wants, even when she knows she's not entitled to it." On the other hand, Andre, he said, was a calm, sensible witness who dealt with all questions put to her, some of which were difficult and personal, but she dealt with them in a convincing fashion. This counted very much in Andre's favor, but would that be enough to tip the balance for her? As the judge pointed out, the difficulty was that much of her evidence was about what went on between Annie and Niki rather than what Andre actually heard, so a lot of it was hearsay. First, Andre accused Niki of tricking Annie into believing that Andre had put her money where she would never be able to get her hands on it. The judge found this accusation was untrue, and Niki must have known it wasn't true when she told her mother those stories. Second, there was the story of the stealing by Andre's husband. The judge found that this accusation might not have been material, but for the fact that this piece of poison would be likely to reflect badly on Andre in their mother's eyes, and Niki must have known that. Another accusation was a discussion as to whether Andre should be reported to the police for fraud. The judge believed Andre and said their mother would have understood Niki to be saying that Andre had stolen their mother's money. Then there was the issue of the email. The judge found that Niki had unfairly distorted comments made by Andre when she told their mother that Andre was questioning her sanity. No doubt, this made their mother really angry. These might not be big issues individually, but we're reminded by the judge that the physical and mental strength of the testator are important in these cases. The intention of someone who is ill and weak can be more easily overcome than that of someone who's hale and hearty. As the judge said in one case, simply to talk to a weak and feeble testator may be enough to wear them down so much that for the sake of quietness, they do anything they're asked to do. In such cases, as with this one, a drip-drip approach may be highly effective in sapping that person's will and getting them to do something they had not meant to do. He concluded that Annie's intended effect of excluding Andre was to create a more even distribution of assets between her daughters. And this was based on a mistaken belief that Andre had helped herself to a substantial amount of assets already. The judge pointed out that a mistaken belief by itself is not sufficient to set aside the will. What's crucial is that the mistaken belief was induced by fraudulent misrepresentations or fraudulent calumny. So in summary, the judge said that Niki's fraud had induced their mother to change her intentions regarding her will. The will could not stand. What can we learn from this awful case? The lesson is that you can't hope to influence somebody to change their will through poisoning their mind against somebody else and hope to get away with it. What the mother had wanted was purely to leave her estate equally between her two children, and that intention, the judge found, had persisted up until when she made her will. But the poisoning of the mother's mind by one of the children made her think that by cutting the other out of her will, she was actually equalizing the estate between the two, but she was sadly mistaken. This resulted in an unfair situation which the judges took it upon themselves to correct by throwing out that will which had been gotten through fraud or fraudulent calumny, so a fair result was obtained in the end. That's it for this episode of Case History. Join me next time for another interesting look into the workings of the law and the machinery of justice.